Yeah, again, my name is Aaron Staubel, and I'm a board certified behavior analyst and president of Behavior Advantage. I live in Truckee, California, up in the mountains with my beautiful wife and two beautiful daughters. Professionally, I've been, as Chris said, supporting schools, kids, and families around the country for almost 20 years. As a BCBA and program manager on several nationally funded research projects, my role has always been supporting school districts in building internal capacities to solve those behavior problems that interfere with learning, social emotional development, and independence. I do want to start off by thanking ASA for this opportunity, John, Chris, and Ann specifically, to partner with such an amazing organization and the ability to meet with all of you and share a little bit about what we do to help schools, teachers, and students at Behavior Advantage. And coincidentally, I'm actually presenting here at a Region 5 BOCES site in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And this is an ESA, an ASA member that we partner with at Behavior Advantage. And we've been doing, I think, really amazing work to support the state of Wyoming, bringing quality behavior supports to the schools in this state. So with that being said, to start off, when it comes to addressing behavior problems in schools, we know what works. Positive behavior interventions and supports, or PBIS, is a proven model that improves student outcomes both academically and behaviorally. It reduces suspensions, it reduces office discipline referrals, it reduces restraint and seclusion practices, and also improves teacher outcomes such as perceptions of safety, efficacy, and school climate. Within PBIS are the evidence-based practices or strategies that have been shown to improve both prosocial and academic behaviors while reducing inappropriate behaviors within the student population. Knowing which evidence-based practices to select for a particular student or situation is greatly enhanced when we consider the environment, the context, and the function of those problem behaviors. And this is exactly what Behavior Advantage does. We provide the software and the services to guide educators through this proven process, expanding their toolbox of evidence-based practices through a functional lens and helping them create legally defensible and clinically sound behavior plans, all while saving them literally hours and hours of time so that they can really focus on the clinical aspects and not the mundane pieces of actually having to write the report from scratch or write the plan or develop the plan from scratch. So let's review just a couple foundational concepts that drive our behaviors, our students' behaviors, and even our teachers' behaviors, as these understandings really provide the basis for any solid behavior intervention plan. Behaviors occur within an environmental context. So let's take a very basic behavior that we engage in every morning or every day, like getting dressed. If we're planning on heading out to the mountains for a long hike, then we might want to put on Gore-Tex, hiking boots, a rain jacket, a backpack, and maybe a hydration system. And this would functionally serve us well in this kind of context or environment. However, if we chose to get dressed like this on our way to a dear friend's wedding, this would be kind of weird to show up in this attire at a formal event. So context really matters. And if we think about what we dress like to go to work, if you're like me, maybe you end up dressing with a button-up shirt, a tie, and some slacks before entering a school building or a classroom. But context can change, and when context changes, so do behaviors. So with COVID, for instance, we're still going to work, and I'm still wearing the button-up shirt and maybe a tie, but I might be wearing no pants and pink boxer shorts. And this would be completely unacceptable if I dressed like this going into one of your schools. And so again, this is just a funny but very real and relevant example of how behaviors can change based on context. This is going on in schools all the time with student behavior. So out on the playground, we see silly behaviors like hanging upside down, screaming, yelling, running around, and what would normally be viewed as very disruptive behaviors in the classroom are completely appropriate in the playground, and vice versa. Crisscross applesauce, sitting in circle, raising your hand would look kind of weird on the playground. Context also changes as we get older. And as we all know, those of us who have worked in secondary settings, behaviors change and context changes as kids get older. And so understanding that when we work with middle and high school kids, that the behaviors that they engage in with each other to socialize can be very appropriate, but when they engage in those behaviors around adults, they can be perceived as very disrespectful. And so we want to consider context when we think about social behaviors, problem behaviors, before we try to solve or address those behavior problems. The second fundamental foundational concept that we want to consider here is that within these contexts, behaviors communicate the needs, the wants, and the desires of the learner. Okay, so if we have a context where I'm in a classroom and no one's paying attention to me, I can experiment with a variety of behaviors to get my needs met. I can be disruptive. I can be creating outbursts, annoying my peers, throwing paper airplanes, or I can raise my hand, pay attention, make on-topic statements or comments. Both behaviors within this context might have similar results from my perception. I might get the classmates to laugh at me. I might get their attention. Now the teacher's talking to me. I've just gained some stimulation. I'm no longer bored. And this is how we learn. This is what we do as kids, especially to experiment with what behaviors work to get our needs met in different environments. And so we're considering not just the context, but what behaviors might be communicating within that context. Another example might be something that we do all the time in either distance learning and in classroom environments. We tell kids to do work that is often hard or non-preferred. So start your assignment. And we see kids experimenting with different behaviors. Frustration, arguing, shutting down, and ignoring us can result in us leaving them alone and they don't have to finish the assignment. But other kids can be taught and trained to engage in more adaptive communicative behaviors to escape and avoid the exact same assignment. Like, can I please go get a drink of water right now? Kid still gets to avoid the assignment, but it's an adaptive behavior that preserves the integrity of the learning environment. But these behaviors are learned, and if they're not learned, they must be taught. But this is how we learn. Within these contexts, we are engaging in a variety of behaviors thousands and thousands of times. And what happens is that these behaviors turn into habits. The students that we teach at a great level are no different than any of us. We all have developed good and bad habits. We all want to develop good habits, and we all struggle with some of our own bad habits. And this is just the nature of, I think, being a human. But when our bad habits start to really impact our ability to function socially or to do our work or just to navigate the world, we often seek extra help, support, and encouragement to help us change those habits. And this can be a personal trainer, this can be a psychologist, a counselor, a good friend. This could be a nutritionist, a dietitian. All of these folks specialize in behavior change. And what they're really offering us are good interventions, what we've been calling evidence-based practices, to help us practice new good behaviors that will hopefully turn into habits. Now, we do this all the time very successfully in schools, especially when it comes to academic behavior. So we'll take a kid who is struggling to learn to read, and we will implement evidence-based practices like a new reading intervention, resource support, small group instruction, more opportunities to practice reading at a level that works with this particular learner. And we're very good at doing this. We want to get better and better at using the exact same approach to solve behavior issues. So let's say that we have an elementary school and the kids are really struggling with leaving the classroom quietly, standing in a line, keeping their hands to themselves. We can employ evidence-based practices such as visual supports to help accelerate these responsible behavior habits of standing in a line and keeping your hands to yourself. Or a lot of the times we're working with kids who have emerging mental health disorders or developmental disabilities that really make it difficult for them to plug in and socialize or practice pro-social skills, which are important for anybody being part of society. And we can implement evidence-based practices like peer-mediated interventions and supports, where we train peers to help support our target student to practice, rehearse, and develop better social skills. We also work with kids who struggle with controlling their emotions, and this can put them on an IEP or in an at-risk population. Sometimes they're in general ed, but we have very solid evidence-based practice interventions that have been proven to effectively teach self-regulation skills. And this is what we're doing with behavior plans. And this is why we write behavior plans. What a good behavior plan does is it considers the context and the function of the behavior problems that we're addressing. It then matches the evidence-based practices to prevent those problem behaviors from occurring, teaching the new skills that the individual needs to learn, the new good habits they need to learn to be more effective in a learning environment. And it also recommends how are we going to respond to future instances of behavior problems to keep everybody safe and to teach the student to think twice before they start engaging in these problem behaviors in the future. This approach is a proven model that is much more likely to be effective than a traditional approach that relies almost entirely on punishment and discipline to remediate behavior problems. And the reason that punishment and discipline alone, not that it can't be an important piece of the puzzle, but when it's overly relied upon, we are not being honest about the myths that punishment that comes with punishment. And those include, number one, you cannot punish good behavior into a kid. That's not how punishment works. It's a behavior suppressant. Suspension does not improve academic and social skills, and punishment does not create a positive school climate, which has been associated, positive school climates have been associated with greater academic achievement and lower rates of behavior problems. When we write good behavior plans is also important to consider. Right now, we have federal law through IDEA that mandates we consider function-based positive behavioral interventions and supports for kids in special education, but this trigger is often only pulled when the wheels have come off and the student is looking at a manifestation determination or multiple days of suspension, and these habits are so ingrained and honestly harder to change. I still think it's good that we have some legal guidance here on when we should rethink a traditional punishment approach and really put our chips in the corner of positive behavior interventions and supports. But a much better model to consider is to really think about intervening early. As soon as a teacher has a concern about a student's behavior, this is a much more proactive approach to positively changing behaviors. Within the MTSS continuum or multi-tiered systems of supports, Behavior Advantage, we address all tiers of this model. Yes, we have everything you need to develop a function-based FBA and corresponding behavior plan for your students engaged in some of your most intensive behaviors. But we also provide the software and the consultation and online supports to help your schools develop targeted interventions for at-risk populations and to help schools interested in building a more robust foundation of PBIS for all students in the building. We look at this entire model as being important at Behavior Advantage, and we address each tier of the MTSS continuum. Here are some examples of how we can do that. Let's say that you have a resource teacher struggling with a student to comply with basic directions and to stay on task. And so she might reach out to her school psychologist for help. What often happens is the two will find time to meet and they will discuss the student, try not to let the meeting devolve into a 45-minute meeting just admiring the problem, ending up with no real plan, or they'll have to open up a Word or a Google Doc and start from scratch to generate evidence-based practices, make sure it fits into a legally defensible, clinically sound model. How are we going to progress monitor this? And what the alternative is with Behavior Advantage is to log in and use the software to guide the process and document what are going to be the evidence-based practices to prevent, teach, and respond to this student in these situations. And literally with a click of the button, they can create a very clean, professional report that can be shared with the family, administrators, and the team. And every behavior plan also comes with an implementation checklist, which we'll talk about in a bit, that will help guide them to actually implementing the plan with fidelity. In addition, for every behavior plan that's created, let's say that the annual review comes up for this student, they're able to clone this behavior plan, give it a new date, make any modifications, and in just a few minutes, they're prepared for that upcoming IEP, literally saving them hours and hours of time. Or let's say that all the work that they put into this student and another kid walks through the door next year or in 6 months with very similar challenges and situations, they're able to clone this first kid's report for the new student, make any necessary modifications, and they have a solid evidence-based plan that they just created in a few minutes for a student that presents with very similar challenges. And we have a lot of our customers at Behavior Advantage using our simple behavior plans for students in the general ed population. So that proactive approach of let's not wait for a student's behaviors to put them on an IEP. Let's develop a very simple behavior plan. It doesn't need to be complicated, but it just shows the team, here are a few things, a few EBPs that we can implement now to try to keep this kid who's at risk from falling into our special education group. Here's another example of how Behavior Advantage can support your buildings. Let's say that a school is struggling with several students engaging in chronic disruptive behaviors. Maybe some of them are on IEPs, maybe some of them are gen ed, as I mentioned. And the educators at this site are frustrated and they want additional support and guidance. I mean, how many times have we worked in a school where they say, oh, this third grade group is really tough and I feel bad for fourth grade because they're getting them next year. What we can do is we can log into Behavior Advantage. We can easily design a simple check-in, check-out system using Behavior Tracker. We can then implement this highly effective self-management intervention with a small group of targeted students, and we can simultaneously progress monitor and graph student performance for each kid. And this information can be shared out with your MTSS teams, your educational teams, your IEP teams, to make data-based decisions moving forward with this small group of kids. Or let's say that maybe some of your schools are struggling with how to best promote inclusion practices with their students on the autism spectrum. They've tried a bunch of different strategies, but nothing seems to be working and they're running out of ideas. They can access our online clinical support services with a board-certified behavior analyst, and they can meet online using Zoom, which everybody is used to doing now. They can review student assessments, behavior plans, inclusion practices. They'll get on-demand behavioral expertise, new ideas. This is a really wonderful resource, especially in the time of distance learning and COVID. It can be a very inexpensive way to provide professional development and build capacity. I have been doing this for years, providing online clinical support, but when everybody shut down in March, the demand for these kinds of services just skyrocketed. and they are very effective and an inexpensive, efficient way to develop PD. What we can also do here is just never underestimate sometimes bringing together a group of educators who just need to be encouraged and told that they're doing the right thing and to stay the course, because sometimes it takes time for habits to change. And plugging in with the BCBA online and reviewing the data and reviewing the plan and just hearing from someone to tell them, you're doing a great job. Let's look at the data. I know yesterday was rough, but look at this graph. It is showing that the student is making progress. You're doing a great job. Ultimately, this is what Behavior Advantage does to help your educators directly address student behaviors while saving hours and hours of time. If you see here on this screencast, a user is able to log in and review a huge toolbox of evidence-based practices, match those strategies to a particular student's needs. Each strategy comes up with how to implement this strategy or practice with pre-K elementary examples, as well as middle-high examples. They can edit all of that. They're going to end up with a very robust, good-looking behavior plan that can be shared out with the team, and data collection tools to progress monitor and make data-based decisions. So your teams should be showing up to meetings with very good-looking reports and graphs that they can share out or align with IEP goals, and make those data-based decisions that everybody's really trying to become common practice in their schools. But as we know, even the best written behavior intervention plan will never change student behavior if it's not implemented with fidelity. One illusion of the behavior plan, in my opinion, is the name at the top. It's always the student's name, but it's worth considering whose behavior are we really trying to change with these behavior plans. And when we think about it that way, we need to recognize that we're recommending strategies for the staff and the educators to implement and the families to implement in order to change the student's behavior. And that really requires a process and a plan to implement these EBPs with fidelity, and an implementation checklist that's automatically generated for every BIP in Behavior Advantage helps educators identify the resources and the training that they might need to implement the plan with fidelity and to plan for that. They can also use this document to make difficult staffing decisions. You know, are we going to recommend a one-on-one para if we haven't fully implemented this plan? The administrators at the schools that we serve rely on these documents heavily to help make those decisions. You know, am I going to bring in a whole new staff member when we haven't yet reached a level of implementation fidelity? We can also use this document to make difficult program placement decisions. Are we going to consider an alternative placement for this kid if we have not yet implemented the plan with fidelity? To also help teams implement behavior supports with fidelity, again, coming back to the online clinical supports that Behavior Advantage provides online to help your teams with professional development. What does implementation look like? Is this plan reasonable? We can review those student-specific behavior plans and supports. We can talk to your teams about data systems and analysis and teaming so that we can get these plans implemented and support your teams so that your students are fully supported with positive behavior interventions and supports. So there's a brief overview of kind of the context and what some of the things that Behavior Advantage does to support educators around the country. And I would be happy to take any questions that you might have. We will also, for anyone that attended, we will be sending out, if you're interested, a free simple behavior intervention plan and corresponding implementation checklist templates for students exhibiting attention-seeking problem behaviors. And this is something you can take back to your team members at home and share with them and kind of give them an idea of some of the permanent products that Behavior Advantage provides. Any questions I can answer?
Aaron, there's nothing in the chat or the Q&A right now, but we can make sure that we can send this out to all of our members and to the participants.
That sounds great. Yeah, and if you need anything else from me, or if anybody contacts you and would like any questions answered, or if anyone would like to set up a personal demo of Behavior Advantage or talk about options or possibilities, we're always available.
Aaron, as one of our newest business partners from AESA, and on behalf of everyone from AESA, thank you so much. This was terrific.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Happy to be working with you all.
All right, take care. Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.